You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got the same people that were with me in part one. I got my partner in crime, Lisa, the Occult Reject Mad Scientist, joining us. I also got Jin, the Ninja from Threshold Saints. And I got JJ Vance, not the Vice President. If you want to check out all of their stuff, their links are in the bottom. And the guest of the hour of the episode today, again, Heidi. Heidi, in case there's people who are catching you for the first time, which if they are, I highly suggest to go back to part one. But if you're going to continue to listen, Heidi, would you like to let everybody know kind of what your deal is and where they can find all your work, please?
You bet. You guys have such better names than me. I'm Heidi Love. My parents actually named me that. That's like my real name. And so that's what I go by because why not, right? I mean, they were kind of crazy hippies. So why not keep it? And I am at the Unfiltered Rise podcast. I'm everywhere podcasts are served. I do a plethora of things on there, but for my stuff, if you search me out, because you probably won't see too much of my stuff on my own channel because that's weird. And you'll just have to look for my name and my podcast. And I talk a lot about the Mormon church because I was one and I grew up in it. I was born in it. My family's pioneer Mormons. Kind of got a hit piece done on me for saying Mormon royalty. What I mean is my family was royalty and then they came here and they were Mormon, not like Mormon royalty of the Mormons. I guess I did need to clarify that. So there's that. And today we're going to talk about some more of Howard Hughes and exactly how the Mormon church always seems to be everywhere I turn around.
Oh, yes, they are.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Thank you. No, this is an amazing story. And like, again, people haven't caught part one, please start from there, but this is definitely going to be a spider web. And from what I'm guessing, probably at least 3 to 4 parts. So
yeah,
definitely pay attention.
It goes. So this one today will be more circled around like early days, Mayhew, and then we're going to get into Watergate. And then after that, and Watergate's so important to this whole picture because, and also Howard Hughes' death. And so when you talk about Howard Hughes' death, what is like the ramifications afterward, where does the money go, who gets all that, and it also involves Mormons because of course it does. So I'm gonna present here in 1 second. Let me get this screen ready. And it's an interesting dive I never expected to go down, so that's kind of a fun piece of it too, just because you never know where it's going to take you. It got weird, so that's all I know. So I've got that pulled up. I'm going to send present. And
I know one thing we discussed last time, Heidi, was, one of the questions you pointed out was kind of the question marks surrounding whether or not Howard Hughes was some sort of spook or CIA operative, and I know we discussed the Glomar ship in that last podcast, which I think that's an interesting topic because that's where the term Glomar response comes from, I believe, in regards to Freedom of Information Act requests.
Right. And I do think it's super interesting that he was kind of obsessed with Atlantis. And then if you look at the name and look at where that comes from, like the project that they called it, and it's an Atlantean project. And so I just think it's very strange. I didn't bring that one with me, but it is definitely a name of Atlantis. And so I just find it weird that not Glomar, they called it, what was the name of that? The actual project. Do you remember, JJ?
Oh, I don't remember the actual project.
Azorius?
Yes, that's it right there. Yep. Yes, that is an Atlantean term. And so I do think Howard Hughes was dialed in. I do think he has the knowledge of like what people would like to see in the future released. And I do think it's going to play into today. And so like our day and age, not this presentation, although it does. And so can you guys see this slide okay for Summa Corp?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So a little bit about Hughes and what happened on our last one is we were kind of wrapping up with that, one of the agents for the Mayhew kind of organization, which he gets labeled into the Mormon Mafia, and he's not a Mormon. So it's kind of fun, but he was a very big spy. And he was excessively dialed in when we talk about hits. Yeah. And so he was very dirty, completely involved in also the Bay of Pigs, which is super important. And he does have Watergate ties as well. So we'll kind of talk with him a little bit today, but not as much. He's going to come up from time to time, but he's not the main focus because he was kind of the last time. But the Summa Corporation was kind of this thing that they all fought over. And it was funny because Howard Hughes owned it, but he wasn't on his own board. And so it kind of changes company hands a lot. And Mayhew at one point was running it, and then Gay ends up running it, and he's the Mormon guy. And so it gets interesting, but Mayhew never goes away. Mayhew's too big to go away. He's kind of the too big to fail guy. So Summa Corp wanted to, they kind of had all of, which Summa is also means the top. It means, and he had another, like a housing development in the area, kind of the same thing as Mount Olympus. And it was called something, Summa something. And I was like, this is funny, little travel over, but that's just a little tangent. So Summa Corp owned all of his corporations underneath of it. And he was getting killed in taxes. He was just desperate to get out from underneath the tax levies that he had. And he didn't quite know how to do it. And so this guy, Bennett, comes into the picture heavier on this episode. And Bennett, we talked a tiny bit about last time, and there's a book out. And can you still see me a little bit? I don't know if you can see this book, but Age of Secrets. And Gerald Bellett is the one it was dictated to, but this is John Mayer's diary, and he is a huge player in this case. And he kind of blew the lid off everything on this. And so everybody else kind of kept their secrets, and they prosecuted him and tried to throw him in prison for murder. So I think he was just sick of it. And that's how this whole story kind of comes out, because Bennett never did come clean. Not even during Watergate did he come clean. And so we don't get this information until super way later on Bennett. And Bennett is a principal client at the time of the Watergate scandal, but he also was completely involved in the whole Howard Hughes business. In fact, being a part of Summa Corporation himself at times. He also was a 25-year or 23-year Senate grandson. So his not grandson, his dad was in the Senate, I believe. And then he went in the Senate. And then he's also the grandson of Heber J. Grant. And so that's important when you're talking profits. And he was an LDS church chaplain from 1957 to 1969 in the Utah Army National Guard. And he became president of this Robert Mullen Company. And the Robert Mullen Company is going to become very important when we get into this Watergate situation, because it's basically a CIA front for companies. Okay. And he's also kind of trying to work for Hughes under the level to help him get somehow a tax deduction. Okay. Some way he can stop getting completely raped for taxes, which, I mean, come on, I don't blame him. And people love Bob Bennett, and I hate to talk about him. And this is when he becomes a senator himself. And I mean, I'm not talking bad about him. Just some of his decisions are interesting. And that's because honestly, he was in the CIA and nobody knew, and he couldn't tell the truth. He didn't even tell the truth later when he's in all the Watergate hearings. Like, it doesn't come out for a really long time. And during that time he served in the Army National Guard as a chaplain, he actually was scouted out and was a part of the CIA. But nobody knew this, like nobody. They just thought he might be an asset or something. And then he becomes integral into Howard Hughes because, like I said, he takes over PR relations director for the Summa Corp 1974 to 78. He also secretly worked under George Bush for the CIA. So remember George Bush there, because that's going to be important. And he used the CIA front company. Like I said, it's a PR agency, especially for guess who? And this is going to tie into our friend Justin, who I miss desperately. He's great. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir. So he also doesn't have a whole ton of employees, but one of his employees is super fun guy. It's E. Howard Hunt, right? So once you get Howard Hunt in there, you're like, okay, he purchased this company. He gives, this Howard Hunt a job, basically. He also gives Richard Helms. It's all this stuff. Like, it's basically just CIA guys. And they're all older at this point and kind of doing their thing. But at the same time, like I said, he's trying to, everybody is trying to help Hughes get some sort of tax break. So he's still helping, even though he's doing his thing, because Mullen Company is not on its own. It's definitely under Hughes. It's still kind of owned through that. And we still have Mayhew, and he's still putting bugs in everybody's ears for Hughes. And the thing about Hughes is he is literally desperate to do two things in his life. Number one, get the tax break. Number two, stop the Atomic Energy Commission from blowing shit up. Okay. And that's because, Howard Hughes had Jack Parsons work for him. I don't know if you guys knew that, for a time. Not only Jack Parsons, but he had this guy, and he's great. Let me find this paper that worked for him. This guy. So he makes this time machine, he says. And if you look at the symbol, JJ, I'm actually glad you're here today. This was his pamphlet for this whole nonprofit organization. It's kind of like a religious scientific experiment. I'm going to find it.
Is this that location in the California desert, like the Gravitron or something like that?
Yes. And his name is Van something. I got to find it, but
it's been a new age for a long time there.
Yes. And they still go there. They did, I think, tear that down, but they still go out there and do the whole like channeling bit. And the funny thing about this guy is very close with Howard Hughes. And listen to this story. He's not a Mormon, but he says this. And an angel came to him. I've heard this story before. JJ has too. And told him to stop blowing shit up, basically, and make this machine. And this was going to rejuvenate and like basically time travel people backwards so that they could be more youthful. And Howard Hughes was kind of obsessed with stuff like this because he'd been sickly half of his life. I mean, like now he's kind of sickly in a more, well, I question self-inflicted way, but we'll just leave it at self-inflicted for now with his drug habit. But he had a ton of pain. He had crashed a lot of times, but even as a kid, he had multiple ailments. So, when we talk about this and the Integratron, I'm sure he's 100% listening. But basically, that Crowley said, these bombs kind of open things. And Parsons also talked about this. And I think they're just trying to shut the door. And he's like obsessed with this. And that's where John Meyer comes in. He literally hires John Meyer to petition and go about following through to the Atomic Energy Commission to stop this because he's so upset by it. He's just like, it can't continue. These people start a church over it. You can see their insignias. It's strange. And they all and Hughes paid for that to be done, all of it. Van Tassel, there it is. Okay, so Van Tassel does this for him under all of this money, and Hughes is just obsessed with that and the tax thing. So the tax thing doesn't go away for a long time, and finally he decides, you know what, through Mayhew and through Mullen Company, he decides he's going to petition these people and pay them off. Okay. And when he does this, it causes serious problems. I dare say it causes more problems for him than the actual like break-in and the whole thing. Like it's just blows up in his face. And Don Nixon, his brother, is a big part of where this started, because originally he takes a $250,000 loan from Hughes, the loan that never had to be paid back. And this becomes part of the scandal. And then it goes into a whole nother thing, which we all know with Watergate, that he was also paid more money underneath Hughes for his re-election campaign. But this re-election campaign was like a shell campaign. There was like there was no proof that it was really happening, or like where the money really went, or nothing about it was okay. But guess who organizes this whole campaign for him? Two guesses, because I've named two.
Anybody want to guess?
The Mormon, of course. Bob
Well,
Bennett.
Mayhew, probably, right?
Nope, it's Bennett this time.
Oh,
Bennett is
okay.
all over this. And so Bennett is the one behind it. And this is where Bennett gets sketchy, because at first people are like, oh, he's just tangled up in it because dumb Howard Hunt, and he's just dumb, and it's him, and people really defend him to this day. Like, I will tell you guys, he's kind of, you want to talk about Mormon royalty, he's way up there. I mean, literally Heber J. Grant's grandson. And so when we talk about this stuff, it's kind of hard, because I know the TV, True Blue Mormons are going to come after me and say, oh, he was just a nice guy that got, caught up in it because he owned the company. The company itself was a CIA shell. So that's not necessarily true. So all this stuff starts to come out. Hughes loaned Nixon cash and his family cash and all this stuff. And it's just not, it's not good. And then on top of it, we know that there were different factions involved with not only getting Hughes out of town, which brings in these guys, all this dirty money, it brings in the mob, it brings in like all the 3-letter agencies, and it brings in the Bay of Pigs. And that's why Nixon is quoted saying, I don't think you want to open this up. This is like a whole little condensation of his big report that he said, because the American people don't need to know about that right now, basically. Because if they were to find out exactly what was happening with the Bay of Pigs, it was going to upset everyone. And he was involved with so many things, and let alone with Hughes's involvement of the things, it got completely blown out of the water. It completely devastated the trust of everybody. And the plumbers, a few of them, I think, were it became Mormons after the fact, is what I read, that they weren't Mormon before, but they became Mormon and all this. So what the truth is, I don't know, but I do know that Mormons are all over this, including Hughes's exit out to the Bahamas, because Hughes's exit to the Bahamas is done by a guy named James O. Golden, who is huge up in the CIA and FBI, and he actually ends up running Interpol. He's big. And when we get into him, he's the one that actually is involved with this paper right here, Resorts International, because that's where they took Hughes. They took him to a Resorts International hotel, and those all go back to the Mary Paint Company. So I think when you look at this full picture, to go to Permindex, you have to lay this ground, because you're like, well, who's that? And why are they there? And what does that matter to some mobster guy or whatever? Well, everybody's got their hands in the cookie jar. And I mean, everybody. So the one thing Hughes did after he gave Nixon all this money was say, like, you need to push through my medical company so that it can be my shell company for taxes. And he got it to be done. Nixon did it after the IRS denied it. And so it all looks bad. Like, that's, I'm pretty sure, why he just stepped down and didn't want to go through with everything. People also started dying like crazy. And I mean, if I were him, I definitely wouldn't want to have all those deaths put on my conscience. That's a lot. But other than that, also Nixon was a big fan of space, and this whole alien stuff, and there's talk back and forth about whether or not he put a time capsule in the White House about alien disclosure, which is curious, because he was extremely close with Trump. And he always told him, you should run for president. You'll win. And if you get in there, this is where this time capsule is. This is just the conspiracy end of it. Of course, no proof on that, but there is proof that they were friends. They talked, they were close, and they definitely knew each other. So when you talk about these people all being in bed together, I think it's funny, because the other one that's going to come up next time, probably, unless we run through this, is Cohn. And that's Trump dressed like that at Roy Cohn's birthday. And, people have postulated different things about their reputation together. I don't know, but I do know this. They were very close. Okay. Close enough. It shouldn't have ended how it did. And when you look at the pictures of them speaking together and different things, you go, Well, Trump comes up, and I bring up Roy because Resorts International runs straight into Donald Trump. He ends up running it for a time. Actually, they had a big fight over who was going to get the power of it. And so he ends up taking it for a time, and it was, completely engulfed with organized crime. And when you look at that, I know people want to say, oh, Trump's a good guy. I don't know. I'm watching for the fruits of his labor. I'm not going to diss on him, but I'm just saying you have to look at the full picture when we're looking at all of this. And then also, how obsessed is Trump with space stuff? He's got Elon in there. We're talking, then we get into weird speculation on that with, the whole Werner von Braun book. And this is the picture I told you guys about last time with Werner von Braun and Mormon theological films. And I don't think these things are accidents. I think that, what people have said and talked about is when this whole business came out with aliens, they wanted to guard that secret. And JFK wanted to work with the Russians. And they had just had the war. And this picture here shows they're kind of together, Werner von Braun and JFK. And he dies 2 weeks after this is taken. And I find that super interesting, knowing that the Germans and the Russians have a very contentious relationship at this point. I don't think they want to share anything with the people that helped them lose the war. So it gets into some weird weeds. And, we've taken all the Operation Paperclip people and put them to work, which, if you've looked at anything from Utah and anything about Thiokol and different Mormon space projects, that there was probably some that came here, and let alone the relationship enough for Werner von Braun to be invited into a movie that no one else was in except for Mormons. I find it super curious. And so it's just odd. It's all together odd. And when you put it all together with the hearings and Hunt and even their background, if you get into Hunt's background, do you guys know about his background? Like back before Watergate?
Like OSS days or CIA days?
Well, so CIA days, he was the guy that was basically, down to help with like any of the UFO recoveries. He was on that whole situation, and he worked with Bannister, but he also worked with Bannister worked with Mayhew for 10 years out of the Chicago offices when he was with the FBI. So all these people are like lengthily, not just like, oh, I met him once at a dinner. These are big relationships, and all of this kind of goes together with the Mormons. And I'm like, why are they always there? There's always a person that pops up that just happens to be associated with the church. And then when you get into the Watergate stuff with the Bay of Pigs, you have to go to Bush and the whole thing with Howard Hughes and Zapata Oil. They were using his island, and the Bushes rented it for their drilling operation, which wasn't a drilling operation, but that island in itself is considered to be possibly one of Atlantis islands. And so maybe they were drilling for something. I don't think it had to do with oil, but they were also training the Bay of Pigs people there. And this is a little picture of just their training and what they were doing. It was all an anti-Castro training. And this is the name of the Sal is the island. And I was like, that's, all owned by Howard Hughes. He just leased it to the Bushes. And so even two of the ships involved in the Bay of Pigs, one of them was named the Barbara. So Bush is all over this on top of it. And I think that, Bush ties here soon. He's got some major ties with Permindex and DeMorenshield. And so all of this makes sense when you put it in a big whirlwind, I guess, because like you said, it's a spider. It's not gonna stop. I mean, it just like, I almost have to, organizing it in my mind to like present it is so difficult, because you're like, okay, which part do you want to say first? Which part do you talk about? The fact that you want to talk about that Trump named one of his casino hotels the Atlantis during the time he owned this stuff. Like, I think somebody knows something. And when you go down that road, about his Uncle John, and he's supposedly the protege to Vannevar Bush, who not related to the regular President Bush, but Vannevar Bush is whose protege? Tesla. And this goes to aliens. And I just went, you've got to be kidding me, because I've never really, I mean, I was like, yeah, whatever. I mean, there's realms, sure. You know, there's things out there. I'm not one to like just let it go. But also, like, when you look at this stuff, you go, okay, well, what do they all know? Right. And then you go back to that weird story about the alien visiting that guy. And then you go, what does the Mormon church know? The key. And once again, we get back to the keys. And I'll tell you, you know, Howard Hughes trusted them an awful lot, even though they did him dirty towards the end. And then you get into what happened at the end. And this gets back to the gays and not gay people, the gays' last name. And one more picture before I move forward. This is a fun one of Nixon with Prescott Bush and who? Jack Ruby. Yeah. This is just, you know, when you said it was a spider web, it just explodes and it goes clear into today. So
Heidi, I want to, sorry, I would just want to.
No, please interrupt because I can't see.
I before you get too far, it's a very it's an open-ended question. It can be Heidi, JJ, Nick, or Lisa, anyone. But I don't quite understand why his financials were in such turmoil. If he also was in charge of several CIA fronts, is what you're saying, if I understand. And so shouldn't the financial management be more, you know, even though those are like a lot of black book stuff, like they usually are good bookkeepers from like all the work that Nick and JJ have done and like showing that kind of like organized crime. Like usually they're pretty good at books.
Are you talking about Hughes or which person?
Yes, Hughes.
Okay.
Sorry.
So
I just
because
wondered, like, why couldn't they change or was there a great change in the code? And so that's sort of what contributed to it. Like, I think I'm maybe historically ignorant.
No, you're fine. He just had so much money and he owned so many corporations by this time. He was literally banking in the dough. Like he was bringing in tons of money. He doesn't have any kids. He doesn't have a wife really at this point. He doesn't have a whole ton going out. And he wasn't this big philanthropist until he opens up the Howard Hughes Medical. And so that's right there when it becomes a whole different ball game, right? And when this happens, it like changes the whole dynamic of everything, because then also he's bankrolling the CIA, just so you guys know. And there's been lots of proof, like even these little projects, like even the Glomar, he bankrolled that. Even, you know, all these other things he's bankrolled and bankrolled and bankrolled. Now, did he make money back off them? Sure. He had contracts, you know, exclusively to them. In my opinion, I think everybody was splitting that dough. I think this was more mafia than the mafia, you know.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Heidi. That not only to that point, but then you have the warring factions for power within that mafia, right? And it includes the literal mafia, because you've already painted this interesting dynamic of these varying factions of folks that seem disparate, you know, from the outside looking in, especially when you're talking Permindex.
Yes,
which, you know, is the epicenter of kind of, as you said, the epicenter of this activity. You got Joseph Bonanno, who's the Bonanno crime family, but head of the all the 5 families in New York at the time. Roy Cohn, and then CIA guy himself, Clay Shaw, that's the integral figure in the Garrison investigation.
Absolutely, and we can even go there because I mean, you know, I never know how long things are going to take. But if you know about Permindex, you know who's on the board because you just named some. The others are like fascists and like the attorney. I didn't bring my notes down for that, but the attorney for the Savoy family, like you're talking about some really important people, and they're bankrolled by other people. And Permindex has been said to have bankrolled. I'm gonna minimize this so I can see you guys. Basically bankrolled the assassination hits on not only JFK but RFK and MLK, all of them. And
Charles de Gaulle too, over in France.
Yes, yep. And they tried with him. And what Permindex stands for is a permanent index of people. So this is the hidden meaning. permanent index of people to assassinate, whereas they say it's like a permanent industry development, but it's another shell company. It really isn't anything. But yet here they all come playing again. And like you mentioned, Rebozo, Bebe Rebozo comes up in this. Mo Dalitz comes up in this. Like, we're talking about big players when we're talking about these people, and who do they bump into? Trump, Cohn knows where everybody is buried. He went to his grave knowing that, like, for sure.
And maybe Rebozo's Nixon's close associate, right?
I was just going to bring that up.
Yep.
Yeah, he's an interesting character.
He was actually on the island with Bebe Rebozo when Watergate went down for his backing story. Yeah.
They were actually in the pool together, weren't they? That he always, every time that he would vacation or leave the White House, instead of going to the equivalent of Camp David, he would go down and spend his time with him. Right?
Yes. And that's just so strange. Like, when you look at it and you're looking at like his ties or fascist ties or whatever's happening, and then you like look into it as well with the eyes open of like, I don't know if you guys have heard what Howard Hughes has said about equal opportunity employment, but it was as good as the Mormons talking back when Brigham was the president. It's not good. They're racist. And you're sitting here going, okay, is this their religion still? Like, when they say we won the war, but the Nazis never fell, I believe that. I 100% believe that this was just a division of a power that got too big because they learned how to tap into stuff. And the stuff I'm talking about would be occultic in nature. And there's so many stories about that I do think they were imparted a lot of knowledge. There's tons of different things that advance during that time frame that you see the Germans just go and take off, like literally take off. And Howard Hughes was all about it. There's a rumor that he had his own hangar at Area 51. And so, he's involved in this up to his eyeballs, and he certainly says that there are other entities. Whether or not that freaked him out, I don't know, but I do know this. He started peeing in jars and holding back all of his he didn't clip his nails. He didn't do all these weird things, but think about it. Where's your DNA? It sounds ridiculous until you know the answer and you go, was he just trying to keep himself from being replicated or something? Or who knows what? They're making medical advances at the same time. They're doing, Howard Hughes medical industry. They are known for developing CRISPR technology and all kinds of sketchy stuff. They're involved with Gates. And it doesn't surprise me. Bill Gates and Microsoft Corporation is the LDS Church's #1 holding right now. And when you talk about people not being qualified to run the books, you can look at Elon Musk, and Jared Birchall runs his books, and he's not qualified to do any of that. So you're just like, okay, what's going on here, Mr. Tunnel Digger? Because that's where they met, at the Boring Company,
Sorry, Heidi. I just want to say one thing really quick. Is I think with the peeing in bottles and the fingernails.
I took that as a cult.
It sounds
right away.
funny, but honestly, it makes perfect sense to me. I'm sure it makes perfect sense to Nick. You do not want people to get a hold of your personal effects. This isn't obviously a surgical thing, but it's we'll call it village sorcery. So yeah, like, you don't want, like, witchcraft. That's really what that is. It's like, if you have someone's personal effects, you can do things to them. But then also the peeing in bottles, although that sounds the funniest, actually those are called witch bottles if you make them properly, and you can rebuke magic done to you. This is the idea. If you put in that, but also certain things, usually like broken glass, needles, blue beads, all that stuff. So different
burying
things,
it, for like property, all kinds of stuff. And here's the thing. When you step back and look at things that sound crazy, especially like Mormons, I'm always like, that sounds crazy.
Oh, that's probably true.
That Joseph Smith said people live on the moon, and then you find out about different occultic things or study theosophy and anthroposophy, and you go, oh, got it. And then they live on the sun, is Brigham Young's, and you're like, okay. And so you start learning about stuff in it, and it sounds crazy on the surface, and I don't think they want it fixed, because it's better to sound like that than to explain, oh, we might be using this for like what you said, you know, like, I mean, if you heard that from a person that has, like, think of the most straight-laced people ever, you know, you're not going to like that as in the normal congregation of people in a church, for sure. They're going to be pretty upset with that. They're going to start wondering, like, what? We don't do witchcraft stuff. I heard all that was lies. And then they're going to go look it up, which is definitely not what the church wants. The church definitely doesn't want that. And so I did find my little paperwork on the board. And so we've got Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, and then we've got Ferenc Nagy. He's the former prime minister of Hungary. I'm assuming everybody knows about who Bloomfield is, probably, but he's, you know, high up in Canada. He's running a lot of these kind of same schemes there. We've got Giorgio Mantello, Roy Cohn, Joseph Bonanno, Jean de Menil, Paul Regan-Densky, Count Gutierrez de Spadafora, and that is Mussolini's guy. So, I mean, you're wondering, like, wow, where did all these people come from? Hans Selgemeier, and he's a banker in Basel. Carlo de, oh my gosh, Analio, I think, attorney, House of Savoy. Max Hegelman, Munir Shorbaji, Giuseppe Ziagati, he's an Italian fascist. Florenc H. Simon Fay, he's from Hungary, and Clay Shaw. So why would you have the people that literally are probably involved in all this go back and be on multiple, like, commissions to figure things out, or like put these people in power? And why is Clay Shaw in with fascists and people from other countries, right, with all the stuff he knows? So then you're like, oh wow, what's happening here? And there's this little diagram that I found on Permindex, and it starts at the crown, and then it goes down and it goes to Permindex, which goes to Division 5 FBI, and then it goes down in the middle to the World Wildlife 1001 Club, which I have to do an episode on sometime, or through this, whatever. But it's huge through this whole situation. And then the other branch goes to Hollinger. And I'm just telling you guys, like, when you look at all this and the companies that supposedly helped with, like, funding all this stuff, you go, oh, this sounds sketchy, right? Why is the monarch involved? Like, why are all these houses of Savoy and, like, the monarchy and all these different things involved? Like, it doesn't sound right, you know? And then you look at it.
Also, just to your point you made before in regards to how these things are continuing on to our modern day, you know, with Trump and all these other examples, that continued on as well, even though Permindex essentially, you know, goes away after the scandal. All of those folks, not the personnel involved, but the groups and the power centers involved in that board, all appear again in the Vatican bank scandal. You know, well, and not only
that, but the Mormons again through Halliburton. And so when you look at who's financing, right? So you're looking at all these people and you're like, oh, wow. And also what happens? We run into people that are influencing our next episode, RFK, right? You run into, like, why is Lee Harvey Oswald interested in any of this? Oh, well, you know, why is Ruth Payne? Why are they having seances in the woods with asters and all these weird things? Like, they're doing some crazy stuff, you know? And when you talk about it, it just sounds insane. But then you look at it and you look at the backers, right? We get Bell helicopters. Well, you know, they hired Dornberger. I mean, like, the Dornberger, like, I'm like, what is happening? And it's because they had that knowledge, right? They know all the secrets of all the things, but they've shut all that down pretty much, unless they want to start Wi-Fi, and then they did that. But other than that, they're not.
Common though too, right? Aliens, white nationalism, right? The Mormons and the Nazis.
Yes. Well, if we want to get into Mormons and Nazis, that's a whole. So, I mean, like, think of it. They're really, you know, J. Reuben Clark. You can look him up if you guys think I'm not telling the truth about the Mormons. They are literally the same ideals as the Nazi regime at that time. And they were the ones that kind of started the whole genealogy thing. And they helped people, like started it to be more mainstream, we'll say. They started helping with the Nazis. They said, look, let us into your church records and stuff, and we'll help you prove if a girl is worthy to date. And you started to have to hang your 3 generations back to go date a girl, to make sure, and this is not my words, this is a quote, to make sure you were not a granddaughter of a Jewess. That is what they said. And so I'm telling you guys, like, they literally were in bed with the Nazis. You can look up like the Olympics, then you get into the stuff that Justin talked about, like with them visiting and going to the Olympics and talking all about it in her journal and everything. And she's all happy about how wonderful they treated them. And you're just like, whoa. And then Moroni and the Swastika by David C. Nelson, that book talks all about how, you know, Heber J. Grant was at a banquet there with a big insignia over the table. We'll just say that because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't know what I can say. And then mission presidents, you know, that were putting up signs saying no Jews allowed. Like, they were completely on board. They were doing the salute. They were doing all the things. They were right along with them because, you know, they were white supremacists pretty much at that time too, you know. And they blame it.
I think a lot of that comes from their heritage, though, right? So, like, you're mentioning the alien seance with the DuPonts, the Astors and gang, and the Paynes and whatnot. Well, the Grants, the Bushes, these folks all come from Connecticut and Massachusetts settlements in early America. So I think this quote unquote blue blood lineage of these folks, while it manifests in things like the Mormon Church, it permeates throughout their family tree, the alien beliefs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you know, if you talk to, you know, anybody that's a Mormon FLDS person, when you get to the Kingstons, they literally will tell you that the bloodline of Jesus Christ. And so, yeah, and they're inbreeding and making sure they keep their bloodlines pure. So they take this very seriously. It's not like, it's funny to say it like, haha, but like, that's a real thing for these people. And they're like, well, that's just the FLDS. That's not the real Mormon church. Where do you think it came from? Came from the top, you know. It didn't get split off until the government ties started coming in and they wanted to have statehood. You know, that's the only reason.
Yeah, that's exactly why they were forced to make these changes. They weren't theological changes, but they were, you know, beamed in from you know, Kolob.
No. And one of the monuments, I can't remember which one it was that they were building, and everybody sent a stone in to have this monument built. I can't remember which monument in DC it was, but the Mormons weren't completely finished with their statehood yet. And they sent like the Masonic eye with the beehive state.
Sure.
The state of Deseret. And they're the only ones that like had anything like that. So that tells you a whole lot of answers. And it's just funny to me because I'm like, okay, obviously, like you said, they're channeling, you know, these beings. Well, they say they're the Egyptian deity. Well, what is Joseph Smith completely obsessed with? Egypt. Yep. He's buying mummies off people, you know? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it happened, you know, and then he's got the Book of Abraham, which became a huge problem for them. And, you know, he's saying his writings are Reformed Egyptian. I just think, you know, he talked to something that told him some things, and that's really what I feel. But I don't know. It's too hokey and weird to just make it up. And then also it correlates with other people's stories. And I'm like, oh, well, that's where it gets more credit, because you're like, this person also said they saw this, and then this person, and they're all, oh my gosh, they all started religions. And so then it gives it, you know, a little bit of clout. But when you're looking into these things, and people always say, well, who cares about World War II or Permindex or whatever these things are? Well, they're running things today. They just changed their name. Yeah. They just changed their name, which, you know, it's kind of frightening knowing that, because you're like, wait, why would you just quit? Like, you fought for all these years to take over like the whole thing, Trump, and then you just like walked away from it one day. No, you're just passing the torch. You know, they're all in bed together. And you're right. It's a spider that can't be separated. Like the web is too thick. You know, the spider web is really intense. And when you start looking at it, you're like, oh, wow. And then you bring in like the aliens, like you said. And when you start bringing that in, I mean, you know, the Nazis were not afraid to talk about what they were doing. That's just here that they're weird like that. But over there, they'll tell you all about it. And then when you get into Tesla and MJ12, you know, who comes up? Bannister. And who is Bannister working with for 10 years again? Mayhew. And it goes right back to Howard Hughes. So you're like, okay, they obviously and clearly know quite a few things that they're not going to share. Or probably can't, you know. But again, Tesla, you know, I mean, people want to say, oh, well, you know, maybe he didn't really know things. He got arrested for making an earthquake in New York City, like arrested. He made an earthquake, and people still have a hard time today. Like, oh, weather modification, you nut job. I'm like, okay, we'll go look it up. I mean, he got arrested for it.
Warcliffe Tower from Long Island? Was that what that calls that?
I think it was. I can't remember the name of it. I just remember he got arrested for it, and I thought it was hysterical. But like, they try to, you know, hold these people down. Yeah. Well, and got in big trouble for it. I think it was a dare, if I remember correctly. And even the people that go forward, like, I mean, just for an example, the guy that took Howard Hughes out to the Bahamas and basically kidnapped him. And that's why I say, do I think it was self-induced? No, I think they were drugging him. They found needles in him post-mortem, and they were the big steel needles. And back then, when you were doing drugs, like, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want those honking needles breaking off in your body. He had multiple of them broken off in his body. I do psych. I know what causes that. It's not a willing participant.
How long ago was this?
Never good.
How long ago was this again? What year was this around?
Like when he died, or
yeah.
Or
well, guess what I'm going to get at is at some point, believe it or not, syringes are not easy to come by.
Oh, for
like,
sure.
Believe it or not,
And
if you were a junkie in the 60s or 70s, you were struggling looking for syringes.
Yeah. Yeah, they were like, oh, he had nurses. And I did want to mention another thing about the future. So in 1963, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was miserably failing and almost bankrupt. Okay. Well, 1962. So up to 1963, they are not doing good. And all of a sudden they hired this guy from Canada. And I've researched him a lot. I will not quit researching him till I find a little more answers, but I find it fascinating that the year Bennett takes a fall for a whole bunch of stuff in Watergate, right? And just basically lets them berate him and doesn't say he's in the CIA, and he just gets slapped around, kind of. It totally ruined his reputation for a very long time. All of a sudden, the Mormon Church does great. And now, like within that year, like all of a sudden, all their problems are gone. Do I think that's a coincidence? Not really. You know, people were getting paid off left and right. And I don't think that he did that for free. I don't think any of them did it for free. I mean, they had to have some reason. It's not like they're just loyal to a fault for no reason. I don't believe that. Like, if you were in the CIA and they were coming at you with everything they had in court, you don't tell that. It seems strange, you know. I don't think you would.
Interesting dynamic, financially speaking. I'm not familiar with that narrative of the '60s. So that's certainly something I'm going to dig into with that Canadian fellow. But
yeah, his name was Nathan. I thought I wrote it down.
One other dynamic while you're looking for that, Heidi. One other dynamic I find interesting at the same time where these Watergate hearings are going on, and the Mormons and the U.S. government are beefing. You know, or there's some, obviously some disagreements and dynamic there, obviously, right, with whatever's going on.
Oh, yeah.
Situation.
Oh, yeah.
Scientology's going through the same stuff with the U.S. government. That's kind of the peak of their Operation Snow White, of their beef with the U.S. government. So another ancient alien cargo cult at the same time doing these infiltration and spook activities with the U.S. government.
Absolutely. And then you wonder, like, okay, I know for a fact Thomas Ed Smonson has ties. And if you look at these families, and I know Justin mentioned this, none of their children go to their mission here. Okay. Like a lot of kids get called on their mission and go to like Chicago, or go to like, even some of them go from Salt Lake to Ogden, which, I mean, it's just not very far apart. Yeah. And so none of these people, though, do. They're all international, all of them. And they're all involved. Like there's always these little ties to either Yale, Skull and Bones type stuff, which we know Bush was. And so these are brothers. You know, Thomas S. Monson was shook Bush, was it Bush? Yeah, baby Bush's hand. And there's a picture of it. And they're doing a secret handshake, and it's not Masonic. So I definitely think these people are in a lot higher. Like they're all, a ton of the Mormons at that time period are in the Birch Society. They're in secret societies, and they're not supposed to be. Remember, they didn't change that till I think it was maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where you could actually join a secret society and not go against the handbook of the Mormon Church. You're not supposed to.
Oh, wow.
But now they don't care. And Freemason temples and stuff are popping up more and more. There's like one right down the street from me that was like an old apartment complex. And the next thing I know, there's a Freemason flag hanging off the thing a couple weeks ago. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from? You know? And so now they can do whatever they want. Like they're not hiding it anymore, you know? And I mean, and not that it's, I mean, honestly, it's the same thing, you know. Mormons and Masons are so close anyway, but they hid it for a long time. And a lot of them, like Spencer W. Kimball, I believe it was, now don't quote me on this one because I'm not 100. He was one of the ones that said he was going to miss the Rotary Club so much when he got called to be a prophet, you know. And then, like you said, we've got all the people coming in at the same time into government, on and on and on, when these people are supposed to not trust the government. These people have been raised up to what? Bleed the beast, right? JJ, you know, bleeding the beast is something that the FLDS still does, but the Mormon Inc. is a whole different story now. And I do believe it went mainstream. I think there were other nods to it, but the most mainstream nod was when George A. Smith ended up on the Time cover. And it was just like, yep, these are they're part of the club now, you know. And they do you know they bought Westminster Abbey? I just found this out last week. Google this.
I didn't know that. I didn't know it was for sale.
That happened. Yeah. And they kept it quiet. You can't tell me that they can build down the street from the Vatican and buy Westminster Abbey at like around the same time frame, and there's not some change in the guard. There's been a change in the guard.
I agree with you there for sure. I agree with you there for sure.
Yeah, that is
I think it's money.
What the hell?
Yeah. And it's like somebody sent it to me, and I was like, everything I find out about the church is like, that's not true.
You're like, no way.
Whoops. Guess it's true. And so it's all over the place. Like you would think that would be something they definitely wouldn't sell, right? Like,
yeah, right.
Pretty important. I mean, that's just for me. I would be like, okay. And even the guy that, like I said, that stole Howard Hughes, he gets in within a year of Howard Hughes being there, this guy that took him there becomes Howard Hughes's tool company. He's like over all of his stuff. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, not even 6 months, he's not even in the Howard Hughes tool company for 6 months. And all of a sudden he gets pulled back over to organized crime section of the Justice Department, setting up intelligence. I'm like, and strike teams for this. And I'm like, oh, what better way to do it? Because you freaking know where everything is. You've been there. You were right there with them, you know. And he becomes like a head of Intertel. And you can't hardly find anything about this guy. You got to really dig deep. And I'm just like, wow, okay. I mean,
what
obviously.
Was his name again, Heidi? This guy does sound like a very interesting character.
Oh, he's interesting. James O. Golden. Yeah, he becomes the vice president of Intertel, and then after becomes the crime section of Justice Department of the organized crime. And I'm like, yeah, because you were organized crime. I mean, it seems funny.
He was Secret Service at one point too. It looks like. Yep,
he was all the things, man. If you look at his death announcement. It's very interesting. That's
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of times where you have to go to find anything out on these guys because
Right.
they keep it on the DL so hard. It's like
Very low key.
he was one that was hard to find things about. And actually, I don't know that I would have had it not been for old books like this book. It's not that old, the Age of Secrets book, but there was also another one that was something spies. I'll find it because I want to give credit where credit's due. But it was very interesting to be reading some of these old things and go, wow, these guys were like, I don't even know if there's people like that anymore. Like these people like led the brigade on things. These people like were out in the trenches, and it's just wild to me that it gets so deep, when you're talking about all of it. And I guess it shouldn't be, to be honest, like when you step back and go, well, duh. Yeah, I guess. But I guess the altruistic part of you, especially with a church, you want to believe that isn't how things are ran,
Yeah.
but apparently not. So, like I said, Gay goes on to run Howard Hughes Medical until he dies, almost clear until 2006. And that legacy has been left to his family. And not only that, but his son went on to he worked with Romney at Bain and Company. And not only did he do that, but I think he kind of got kicked out of the Quorum of the 70 for doing these little microloans at that point that were kind of looked down upon for desperate situations before they conglomerated and smashed companies. They kind of would do the little, here, let me help you. And then it was like impossible to meet the needs of this loan, and they would fail, and then they would just swoop up all the companies. And Bain and Company was known for this, and they're both Mormon,
Sure.
So, and not just Mormon, Quorum of the 70 Mormon. And so he makes it in, and like I said, normally when you get to be 70 years old, you kind of have a place for life in the Quorum of the 70. They don't like release you from your calling, and they waited till he was 70 and then they released him. That's a statement. Like, and I don't know if it was that they were trying to shake him down for more money, because they have a lot of money.
Let me get that.
Because his dad was the trustee over that whole thing. Do you know I think they said $17 billion a year goes to Howard Hughes Medical Institute, I think was what the pledge is. Wow. Yeah. It's like bananas a lot.
I didn't realize the Gay family was associated with Bain Capital.
Yeah, his son. It's his son. I have a picture, but
no, that's interesting because that's Mitt Romney never really gets questioned about those activities too much. A little bit politically speaking back in the day, but not the right questions, right? Because that Bain Capital, it got its seed money from George Soros.
Yep. And George, well, because they don't want to get into, so again, like I said, the Mullen Company was the start for the Mormon Tabernacle Choir stuff as far as their advertising promos. Well, then what happens is exactly what Justin says, and we get into big comfy red chairs, right? The big comfy red chairs come with like the Khashoggi family and all these big families, but where are they linking up and meeting people? They're going to these concerts that cost like $2,000 a chair, which is nothing for them, and then they're sat next to these other really important people on the DL, and then they can just have a big meeting and no one knows. And so that's how that plays into forward from this situation going into like the 80s with Beverly Bruff Campbell. And Beverly Bruff Campbell had so much clout that she literally changed the temple ceremony through the prophet. And that shouldn't be, that was supposedly given to them from God, literally. So if she has that much pull, I mean, what did she know?
Which prophet was this? Was this Benson? Ezra Taft Benson?
With Beverly Bruff, it was in the 80s. I think it was Kimball.
I remember those were the two prophets in the 80s, right? Benson and Kimball.
Let's see, Campbell. Let's look.
Taft Benson's always been an interesting character to me because, once again, when you're mentioning Skull and Bones and the Blue Blood families involved in these alien seances, the Tafts are in that conversation for sure. One
Oh,
family
yeah.
that's produced the only chief of Supreme Court and U.S. President, William Howard Taft, but founder of the Skull and Bones is the Taft family as well.
Yes.
Cousins,
Well, and
obviously,
that's why
original
they
Taft.
came and set it up here, right? Like it's never been
Right.
done before or since. Yeah.
Well, isn't Bill Bennett part of that extension there at the University of Utah, Skull and Bones?
I can't remember if Bennett was, but either way, he's dialed in 10 ways till Tuesday. He's in there
Right, but it is
every
interesting
which way.
They would put
Let
that
me
there,
look.
but not at BYU though, right? It's at University of Utah though, right?
Yeah, it's only at University of Utah. Yep, because I
Yeah.
think they didn't want to come across. I mean, think about it. Like you would rather it be a little bit apart from you. You know, if you're going to have to do dirty deeds, you know,
Sure.
dirty deeds aren't going to go over as good. You can't hide as much at BYU. Not that they're not included. I'm sure they probably profit just as much as anyone. You know.
Sure.
Heidi,
But-
I'm gonna
But
jump in.
Ezra
I'm
Taft
sorry.
Benson, you got him and his
Oh, you're okay.
grandfather obviously being. Oh, sorry, Jim. What were you saying?
No. It's totally okay. I didn't want to like interrupt the flow, but you had brought up this idea of the blue blood seances, and that's where I wanted to jump in originally. So I apologize for that. But
No, jump in.
Go ahead.
I think it was so interesting you said that, JJ. So first of all, great. That was a great point. But I also think it makes a lot of sense to what Heidi said last time about the Martinists, because there is even a link in Canada. So this obviously goes to my second point, but maybe in a moment, is that there's a link between the Huguenot French, the French Protestants, and the
Yep.
Martinist tradition. And so as a French Canadian, so we do not like Huguenots. It's kind of like embedded into like your identity. It's like you're the antithesis of them, kind of like as a French Catholic. So
That guy that took over the money for the church, they said he was a big deal there in Canada and basically from like one of those wealthy big deal families.
So that's also really interesting because you were saying, Heidi, about the chartered corporations like the Savoy family and all these people that are royalty. Well, that's the majority of Canada. I mean, it's like 82% is crown land. So it's in trust, in treaty, as they would say, held by the crown. So who is the crown? Well, the crown is really the UK. But if you understand how confederation works, the provinces were confederated at different times. So certain provinces are actually confederated with a charter from the Dutch West India Corporation, like Newfoundland. So that is also interesting because that's where they wrote the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So
Fun fact on that: the first Book of Mormon that was ever translated into a different language was Dutch because they had so many of them.
No.
So connects. And yes, Bob Bennett was U of U. So I'm assuming he's Skull and Bones. They keep that pretty on the DL at this point now.
Well, that makes
a little-
total sense. And then you'd also have the international travel, the thing that you said, Heidi, like when they do their missions, the spooks go away. Well, this is exactly like how university is as well. Like if you do certain particular studies, I'm sure everybody knows this, area studies, like I study Asia Pacific studies. So it's like people like me. I'm not a spook, but I'm just saying it's like area studies, and it's also like Middle Eastern studies, Central Asian languages, Russian, like those kinds of things. Those are the programs and philosophy, and like so it's always people who go abroad. That's really what they like because it's a perfect cover, right? You're just doing your mission.
Yeah.
What mission are you really doing?
Just doing your job. Yeah. I don't
Classic
think you're
statement,
wrong.
Jen.
I don't
I'm
think
not
you're
a
wrong
spook,
at all.
Says the spook. Classic statement of a spook.
I'm really not.
I am not a spook. We were talking Watergate today.
If they wanted me, they would have picked me in university. That's really the truth. If they really wanted me, but obviously I'm too rebellious.
You bring up a great point with the international missionaries, and that's kind of what I was getting at with Ezra Taft Benson. Like, there's always been this weird dynamics between the federal government, despite their claims of being at war and whatnot. There's always this weird dynamic between the two. Ezra Taft Benson was the Commerce Secretary for Eisenhower for 8 years.
Yes.
And then later, the prophet of the church, and then his forefather, also Ezra Taft Benson, was he a president? I don't think he was a president, was he? Or was he
No, I think he was
12 apostles, maybe, I think.
Yeah, I think he was. I think,
Yeah, he was
but
big
I'm
time,
not
but-
100. Yeah.
But it's weird dynamic because when you're talking international missionaries and spook activities as a cover, well, Joseph Smith had dispatched, international missionaries back in the 1830s, 1840s. So, long before anyone heard the name CIA or, FBI or any other three-letter agency. So I always often wonder, did Mormons kind of invent the American spook game?
Well, it's odd you say that because I will tell you guys within 25 to 45 miles of my house, there's Hill Air Force Base, there's the NSA, there's the FBI, there's the IRS, and the CIA.
Damn.
I mean, I know. I can't believe they haven't stormed my house yet. Sometimes they screw with my shit, though. Won't work. Like my StreamYard link won't be there and weird stuff, but whatever.
Yeah. Doesn't show up on Instagram. That was weird.
Boy.
That is weird.
Yeah. No, and that kind of stuff will happen all the time. When I did the show with Justin, my camera crashed, my laptop crashed. I went to go get on. I have another computer right here. That one crashed, and then my power went out. And I was like, wow. Are you serious right now? And he was laughing, but then he asked me, are you by yourself? And I was like, yeah, whatever. I've got a big dog. Come at me, bro. If I die doing stuff like this, so be. I don't care. Speaking of rebellious.
Oh, I wanted to ask. Sorry, I'm so not knowledgeable on Mormons.
You're very kind.
I'm learning. So the prophets, this was a very interesting idea. So do they receive revelation like every different prophet?
So every prophet that becomes the prophet or president of our church is called a prophet, seer, and revelator. And I do believe, Jen, now I think that, okay, we're going to get into some weird theosophy, anthroposophy, which will be great because you probably know all this stuff. So when we're talking about the things that they do in the temple and it piercing the veil, okay, it's well known that, things can pierce the veil and usually it's blood, right? Like has something to do with that, but also it can be mimicry. And I do think these Mormon people, the Goyim, the regular people like I once was that don't know anything. I didn't even know I was a Mason. I didn't even know what a Mason was. I didn't even know that. So those people that do all these things and ceremonies, why would they have people do ceremonies they don't understand? Because they're harnessing that energy. Sure. That's why. Yeah. And so they're taking that. And what is the number? Okay. So they're doing the work for the dead. When you go through the first time, it's for you, but every time subsequently is for a dead person. So what does necromancy provide you if it works? The gift of sight to see. And what is the prophet? A seer and revelator. I mean,
that's a good point. In regards to the calling, though, of the new prophet, seer, and revelator, the president of the church, I've often wondered how that goes down, right? Because they have to have some sort of witness, right? I don't recall all the precise details, but I do recall there being some sort of witnesses required in that process. And they're very ambiguous, I believe, in the exact particulars there to what Jen was saying there. But
now it's LDS Inc., right? Now it's different.
Right. It seems kind of ritualistic, whatever's going on there, right?
Okay, yeah, so I have two follow-up questions. Sorry, Heidi.
No, don't be sorry.
Okay, so two follow-up questions. So my second question will depend on the first one. So is there contention in how the prophets have been named? Okay, so yes. Okay, so this is an idea in prophecy, just from my perspective. All someone has to do is change it so slightly. If you have a son, if you have a cousin, if you have a brother, that you would rather them take the place, especially for Mormons, all you have to do is say it came from the higher source, since you are tapped into the higher source. That's not we would call that a skillful mistruth. So it's not quite a lie, but it is skillful. So it's not the person that maybe the angel said it should be. If you're believing it, I don't personally believe in spirits. Like I believe in them, but I don't take notes from them. And so, all you'd have to do is just change it ever so slightly or change your wording, because a lot of them are lawyers, right? So they understand this idea of like how you can stretch the truth like very well. Like that's kind of the point of law. So I just think that there's something interesting. Like, people could say it was a lie if you misappointed someone, but there's a magical way to think of it that's like, you can kind of get around a direct lie.
Get around the karmic. Well, I do find it interesting that you bring up lawyers because Joseph's great-great-grandpa was an attorney and he was a statesman. And he also was a part of the Boston Tea Party. And so actually they say he was the one that organized it. And so these people come from by Salem. They don't come from where they say they do. They just don't want that on their shoulders.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think you're probably
when you
right.
say brother, cousin, and father, passing on the the power to, sometimes when you're dealing with the Mormons, sometimes that's the same person. Your brother, cousin.
Your brother cousin. It's your brother cousin.
You won't lie, man.
Well, this is something interesting because it's like I brought this up several times. I'm sorry, Nick. Is that the Owen Davies book on grimoires? So I would say 3/4 of the Inquisitions were, we could say probably, it's really about finding source, the publishing of grimoires. That's really what the Inquisitions were about later as the Jesuits ran them. Originally, the Dominicans were doing something you could read as good in the sense that they were wiping out what they would think of as satanic cults. But later, they were really about the publishing. So you could read Salem as also kind of taking place in this, like, yes, it's framed as witches. It's framed as like, Tituba, who's really interestingly from the Bahamas. She's not really, she's probably she might be Afro-Indigenous, but she's probably not. So she's probably just fully indigenous from the Bahamas, whatever that is. And then,
well, his grandpa was involved in the Inquisition. He was an accuser. He actually had his sister-in-law put to death. So
that's interesting. Even that word, the accuser, because that is something of Mars, Heidi. Like, it's like, I'm sure you know this is, and Nick also knows this because we've been talking about it. It's this like idea of like, what is the negative sort of formation of like the spheres of the planets, and the accuser is actually it's the Klipa of Mars. So that is kind of interesting. Accusing someone of doing something specifically that you yourself have done.
And what is on their family knife? It's called the Mars knife because the sigil of Mars is embedded in their knife.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
So I'm glad Jen was here for that one because I wouldn't have thought about that on my own. I know that all those separately and not together. So, yeah. And I just think that was another nod with Crowley being so fascinated with Joseph Smith that, like knows like. And I think he recognized a magician in Joseph Smith. And I think he knew exactly what was going on. And I think it's funny, too, because if you're going to be guilty of something, what are you going to do? You're going to blame another person so vehemently, like, methinks you protest too much, right? And he's like, no, she's the witch. Yeah, she's the witch. So, yeah.
Because men owned all the grimoires. That was sort of the point. I missed that about the Owen Davies thing. But the men own the grimoires. So when they say, oh, it's about the witches, it's about like the things, that's not really what it's about. It's really about the getting at other people's, maybe it was about compiled grimoires, because we know a lot of people would make addendums to their, especially those like Huguenot or Puritan. I've only seen the Huguenot version, so I apologize. But I assume the Puritan Bibles are similar. They would add little notes in the margins, little things like compiled folk.
They had parchments. They had magical layman's.
So that completely makes sense to me. And
I can show them if you want. So
yeah,
you can
I'd
see
love
what
to
they
see
look
them.
like.
Thank you, Heidi.
Okay, I will do that. Yeah, because it's very interesting, and the things that you're saying, I think 100% play in. And this is kind of where I've always kind of gone with it, is that it's not for no reason that this stuff keeps popping up, right? The canes and the parchments and all this stuff. It's got to mean more. And that was where I kind of started things, because his mom is quoted as saying, we don't just sit around and draw things to the House of Brack all day. And and stuff like that. So I'm just like, no, she didn't do it on accident. Do you see this?
Yeah, that's the purpose.
Yep.
That is one of the Smith family parchments. One of 3.
Same sigil as the Integratron there.
Yep. And if you
The
notice,
crosshair symbol.
and Jen will probably know this, when you leave them open, when you are calling down a certain thing and it doesn't have a seal, that means you have a working relationship with that spirit. And so, you know, when you're telling it what to do, you have a seal. But when you've got a working relationship with it, it's a little bit different. You're not so much commanding. So I find it interesting that he was an unlearned farmer, don't you know?
Well,
There's one. Let me
Definitely looks like it.
Let's see. There's 3. Let me minimize that and find it. Hold on a second.
So when you said folk wisdom there, Jen, that kind of, you know, that's kind of right where I'm at with thinking the origins of the Mormons. So, well, yes, it has origins in Freemasonry. To me, it clearly has origins in this Vermont, remote Vermont,
The Martinism, and it makes me very curious as I read some books from Peter Levenda. There's something called Volk magic.
Mhm.
So freaking similar. And I was like,
Volk, like
Or
VOLK,
powwow.
Volk.
it's
Nick JJ and I did a show on DeLawrence Company, Heidi, and we talked a little bit about like Dutch powwow. Well, this is basically Dutch powwow magic. Is like the Psalms, the seals, the ways you use your Bible.
Solomonic, very Solomonic magic.
Yeah, but they include like they'll draw in a couple saints. Maybe they're not saints as like how Protestant thinks of it, but it's like as a Catholic looking at it, that's how it would be. But they're actually prophets from the Bible. So there is something kind of similar, like what you're talking about. Like there is this kind of like, and JJ, there is this kind of northeastern magic that is very specific to America.
I think it's Celtic, if I remember correctly. I'm
where do they get the
trying to find
baptisms from the dead? Like that's long been an interest of mine because I've done baptisms for the dead in the temples numerous times in my earlier years. So I've long wondered the origins of this practice. It doesn't seem to be Freemasonry. So to say it's simply Freemasonry it is largely Freemasonry, yes, for sure. There's no doubt about that. But there's other elements they've mashed together in there in a Crowley-esque Thelema fashion, mashing these things together. But
it's the combination of
that seems to be some sort of folklore magic of some regard.
I think it's magic mixed with masonry, but also like when you look at this, I mean, you can't miss the Kabbalah involved in here, you know?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the Solomonic seals, you can't. Right. It's 1-to-1. Even when I'm not saying that people should do this, but if you buy them, like the Botanica booklet seals that come on like the vegetable parchment, they come in their planetary colors. So they're not prepared. You have to do all the prep yourself. I've done it probably hundreds of times, but you basically you just have the imprint, and then you have to like consecrate it from scratch. So you could say, JJ, that it's folk magic because it's like taken out of its like original form. Like if you pass down Agrippa, you'd be a decent ceremonial magician. You could like figure out a lot of things with the 3 books. Sure, no problem. But you could also say that this is part of like that higher knowledge as well. Like even though they've forgotten something.
See that one too? Can you see this?
Oh yeah.
So
that's what I'm saying, Jim. Like it seems like the Kabbalah. I mean, obviously, heavy influences of Freemasonry, et cetera. But like, there's other elements, like again, the baptism for the dead. That's always been a weird one to me. Like, is there any other? Are you familiar, Jen, with the origin story of where that might come from?
So the Manichaeans, the Manichaeans actually did this. So a lot of weird things come from the Manichaeans actually, like the idea of like the pillars not being the blue and the red is more of the primordial idea, and then it became the black and the white, right? Like the Masonic pillars, the Kabbalistic pillars, but red and blue is really the primordial colors. So, but Manichaeanism really is this idea of the black and the white. Everything is like, it's either of God or it's anti-God. It's not, there's no current that's useful going to the other side. So it's only one, it only goes one way. you could say. So they're very dualistic, and they also did these baptisms of the dead in order to bring in these people who they thought would just be forever trapped in the cycle of reincarnation. They thought, oh, we're going to baptize these people, and then they can hear, because people who were, I guess, practitioners of Manichaeism, they were called hearers. Like a lot what Heidi says, like just the goyim, the people that they're not worthy of having a voice. They're just hearing what the elect are saying, and that's even what their religious leaders were called, the elect. So I think that has a lot to do with this. And
do they ever attach them onto living people? Because that's been my question.
Attach
like Scientology's body thetans?
Yeah. I've thought of it because here's the thing. We're looking, okay, so multiple things are happening in the temple. You're using portal mirrors when you're getting married, and, you're over an altar. We don't know what's in that altar. We also do Typhonian stuff. Like when we do the Paleo, this is what we do. And we do it 3 times. and I'm just telling you guys, like this is how I got married. So see the mirrors facing each other, and it creates a portal. And as you get married over the altar, you look into them and say, you see it forever and ever. And then I did
not know that. That's interesting.
Yes. And then
the whole
you do it every time you do a marriage for somebody.
Right.
So,
which is, that's very exclusive. You got to be both the folks getting married have to be members, but the folks attending have to be members too, right? And they have to get approvals too, correct?
Oh yeah. Only my family that had temple recommends could go. Mm-hmm. You can't just go. There's no way. My dad couldn't go.
Even if you're just a member, you still have to get the temple recommend, right?
Yeah, no, my dad couldn't either.
Stamp.
So you look to the mirror, you say this.
Yes, let me pull that up again. I have another one here too. So this is what it creates.
Yeah, that's wild.
It is a portal, and I truly believe that they are attaching spirits, because think of the spirits that are here that are not legally here. If you believe in angels mating with women, those people that were created from that, or those beings, did not have a spirit sanctioned by the creator. They were made illegally. And so what does it say in the Bible about that? These things wander after they die looking for a place to rest. And that's why when you talk to Jewish people, they'll say there's demons everywhere. And they're all over us all the time, like literally, like it would suffocate the room if you could see them. So when you think about it, like, are they trapping anything here? Because the pentagram that they have outside on the temple, let me show you, it's upside down. And then they have a pentacle. I think the pentacle is right side up, if I have it in this one. And
this is the same concept as body thetans for Scientology, essentially.
Yes,
I mean, that's the same.
That's how I feel. That's what I feel. Anyway.
Okay, I have a question for Nick about the mirror symbolism.
Sorry. Here it is. There's this.
Sorry, Heidi.
Yeah.
There you go.
Did you notice any colors or thought it was interesting for any Kabbalistic reason, Nick?
Well, I did think something up with the gold probably, and then even the
gold is probably knowledge, don't you think? Like
theosophy,
it's like Teferet, maybe.
Yeah, it's Teferet.
And then like that, it looked like there was like kind of green going down the middle.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah, that I found interesting. Yeah.
Like it's a diamond, because there's a crystals like from the chandelier. There's the crystal illumination, and then it's going into green, so you're coming back down into Netzach, into the diamond.
Also, we wear
the diamond creates the rainbow
given to us by Lucifer in the temple. I'll show you that.
That makes sense too, because
with fig leaves.
Yeah, it would be Venus.
Oh, yeah, that would be Netzach.
So and his sigil is to Venus. One of those sigils is to Venus, because I've dissected all of them. And just for fun, so that you know, that guy that built the Integratron said the aliens he saw were from Venus, that they came to him in his bedroom at night at the foot of his bed, and they were from Venus, just so you know.
Well, that makes sense in the environmental stuff that you were talking about, because, okay, so hypothetically, again, I don't speak to angels, but if I did, or angels from any planet anyway, they.
You're like, don't come at me, angels.
Well, I mean, that's fine.
Don't
That's
come at me,
in
bro.
my past.
Don't come at me, bro.
But angels of Venus would be they would be protecting the fortress or protecting the garden. So it would be like protecting the natural world. That would be like a big part of their function, like that you would not, that the garden is supposed to be pristine in their view. So we are never supposed to like kind of, like tame, like we're not supposed to have dominion over it. Like that idea from the Bible would be kind of antithetical to what angels of Venus would think of the world.
These are our outfits, but this is a very unclear picture because somebody snuck in and took these, and this is no shit. New name Noah, shout out you. But new name Noah snuck in with some Google glasses. This picture shows dark aprons, but they are green. They're very dark green with fig leaves on them and one-sided robe. And then we get they're praying in the circle right now, and then they're gonna raise up their hands and say, "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth," because they changed it, but they used to say Pele El. And if you look it up, it's a bad translation because I don't think he was very good at Hebrew, but anyway, whatever. And so this is the temple garb that you wear. Like it's just what you do. And I remember going and thinking, this is not where I belong. This is a bad idea. I was super scared. I was like, and the devil actually comes so Lucifer comes in this session, takes like 2 hours, and you're in the Garden of Eden, and you are going through the whole fall, and everybody has two parts. You get a new name. They give you a new name at the veil, and all these things happen. But when you're there, and Joseph, when Adam gets kicked out of the Garden of Eden, he's praying and he's sad and he's crying out for God, but God doesn't show up. And who shows up? Lucifer. And he says, "Hey, you better get dressed. Here, put this on, because God's gonna see what you did. So you better put this on." And then everybody stands. They say, "Please stand." And the men are on one side, the women are on the other. And then you get up and put your apron on, this little fig leaves from Lucifer. I was always like, why the hell are we doing what Lucifer told us to do? What is happening right now?
Well, everything you said makes perfect sense from a Kabbalistic lens, Heidi. Like perfectly. You have the green flashing of Bennett. So that's an idea. That's like how the diamond crystallizes. That's why it comes into like the density that it does. But then it's also the gardens, pristine. That's the idea of the garden. That's why it's dark green, because it's self-luminous. Like jade is another color, malachite. It's stones that light cannot pass through. But because the light is there, right? You're saying that Lucifer comes to the garden.
Yes. So,
he
comes and says, "Put it on." Yeah. And then you all stand and do it.
That's a plant of Venus as well. So
you said green, and I had to pull up this stone. Joseph Smith had a lot of stones, but this was one. This was one of his stones. And I found that interesting as you said that. That popped into my head. So
was that one of his seeing stones? He'd pop in his hat?
Yeah, they say that he liked this one the best, but I don't think so. I think there's a white one that he probably used the most, because the church refuses to even give anything of it except a rendition, an artist rendition. I have the artist rendition of it, but that's it. Okay. Here's the artist rendition. My guess exactly. He knew too much to be a dumb farm boy, and his family was too prominent. Like his family, his brother's off at Dartmouth Indian College. They call it the Dartmouth Indian College piece. But, I think he had a lot of access to books because he was sick. What are you going to bring your brother home that's laid up with typhoid fever and has all this pustule and almost died and, all this crap in his leg? Well, how about books, Yeah.
And those small Vermont towns were very well educated, despite being, the mountain folk. Very well educated, and I think there's a lot to be said about some of the origins of where he learned these things amongst those towns up there.
Absolutely. This is a rendition from a neighbor's testimony in the Glasslicker case. This is a drawing of what he described happened when they would come and do treasure digging. And so, you know, there's a lot of things they leave out of the story, which are like the practices with Sidney Rigdon in the caves afterward and a whole bunch of other sketchy stuff, but they just don't want to go into it. And I think, you know what, if you're Mormon and you want to, you know, be a part of the Mormon church and they really wanted to help you like they say they do, why do they have so many ignorant people that don't know anything? Because they are using people, and that is why I'm pissed off at them. It isn't because they do magic. I could give a shit less. It's because they do this kind of stuff and they're harnessing the energy from it for their self. And that is just, that to me is just diabolical, you know?
And rolling in those tax-free funds too.
Well, interestingly, sorry,
look
Heidi,
at the symbols on the temple there, Jen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that sigil that you show of Joseph Smith's, you had a modern, like sort of the modern, we'll call it the updated Pentacle of Solomon for it. That's the Pentacle of Jupiter. And interestingly, that pentacle is used for exactly what you were just talking about. It's used to cast away spirits protecting treasure.
And his whole table on this, because this was his Jupiter talisman that he had. They say it wasn't quite correct and that it possibly led to his death because instead of prosperity, it was kind of a curse upon his life because it wasn't quite right on the table there. But either way, you know, anybody that you know, well, or you can look up that is an actual practitioner of magic. If you do not know exactly what you're doing, like people that want to just go buy stuff and like, well, I'm just going to hinky do this today. You best be careful because I postulate, and Jen's here today, and this isn't what we were talking about, but if you guys are good with it, I'll keep talking. I just did a full comparison of Crowley and Joseph Smith, and I think he did the Abramelin. I 100% think he was looking for HGA. I 100% think he was calling out to things specifically, and I don't think he closed anything after if he got it. And that's a problem because once you open, if you don't close, we all know where the Loch Ness Monster supposedly came from, right?
Well, this is interesting, Heidi. What you're saying, very, very interesting to me. And I told you last time that this idea of him as a magician, like as a full-fledged, like he's all the way, he's 33, he's 34. Okay. But what you're saying is like, maybe he didn't know. It's like what JJ is saying. There's like the folk tradition. So it's like folk Martinism. And I'm not saying that as a pejorative, but maybe there's not like a long lineage tradition where the Catholics, they have Rosicrucianism. So it's a lot of the priests understand, a lot of the, you know, people who are running the institution understands, but like with these kind of like rebel Huguenots and Puritans, there's no like great faction running the show. So some of the knowledge may have gotten like a little bit lost, a little forgotten.
Right. Yeah. I think that and if possibly, which I think Lumen Walters was the one that helped him, but also you have to remember when he got sick, and JJ can attest to this, when he got sick, it's always been said like, and then he just laid up in the kitchen with his mom, right? JJ, have you ever heard anything else different? Like basically he's laying around the house.
Yeah, he's
getting better.
Yeah.
No, they sent him to Salem. No, they sent him to his Uncle Jesse. And I found this way later and I was like, never heard this before. What? No. And so he's at that age, that critical learning age where maybe Jesse, you know, taught him some things, and then Lumen Walters comes and teaches him some things, and maybe none of it was complete but he knew enough to become a master mason in a day. I know that. So he did have enough knowledge to pass a lot of tests. And in fact, one of the angels that I showed you in the sigil that was black and white is actually a Freemason password. So it's Jebulon. So I'm like, okay, he knew enough to know how to get in trouble, I think.
No,
was he like 14 years old when he went up to Salem? Was that about 14?
Yeah, but then no, I think he was quite younger. I think he might have been around 10 or 11 because that was when his leg was early in life. I think he was maybe 7 or 8, and it lasted for a long time. They were going to cut his leg off, but instead they drained it, and it was pushing out the bone shards. It was like this horrible situation, and we all know that like if you have a life or death, you know, thing, then that can also play into it where he would be more open. at that point. So, I
He
mean,
brings some good points.
know.
I've always wondered if that story's accurate as far as if it was a miraculous tale of recovery because he's some sort of prophet and overlord type of deal, but there's obviously
something got in there
or something going there, right? Maybe that's a cover story. Who knows?
or something got in him when he was down, and helped him live the rest of his days. I always wonder about that. Like, what if you say you'll do anything? Literally, or was it his parents? Did they? Who knows? But I do know this. It gets very fascinating
around that time. Not just from north to south. I mean, there's a lot of this kind of ceremonial magic cult activity going on.
Yes, he wasn't the only one. I think he just got killed because he had a fat mouth. So, the King Follett sermon, if you look it up, it's very Kabbalistic in nature. It's also talking about plural deities. And I think they were just done with his shit. Like, I think they were like, okay, look, first you're banging everybody's wives. Now you're doing this. Like, that's enough, That's my thoughts. He did marry William Morgan's not ex-wife, widow, I suppose. That many point their finger that Joseph had a part to do with his disappearance. So,
well, politically speaking, he was kind of the Donald Trump of his day, involved in numerous industries. In fact, he had the second largest militia in America, just slightly smaller than the U.S. Army. The governor of Illinois was not going to mess with him. The Mormon militia was far larger than the Illinois militia. So, very powerful dude, banking guy, politics. So he's kind of the, the Donald Trump of his day, if you will. So
yeah, he ran for president. Yeah.
Yes.
Ran for president.
Well, that
I think
is
you're
what
not
got
wrong.
him. Yeah, that's what I think may have got him killed right there. Was the I'm going to run for president, make this entire country Mormon campaign.
Oh boy. And then about the quorum of the 50 too. There's that hidden 50 inside, where they don't ever talk about it. And I think that he knew enough to set it up really well, because they're like, oh, he never read the Book of Enoch. And then he made something like the whole communistic community that he was making, where you give everything. It was like the order of, I think he called it the Order of Enoch. And so I'm like, well, you guys are dumb. Like, hide your history better if you don't want anybody to find it. Check it out. Weird.
All right.
But anyways, with that, we will wait for the rest of this fun stuff with RFK and how it plugs in there. It's quite more fun. I think Jen will like it better because we're going to talk more about the seance. Although we did talk about aliens from Venus. So that was pretty fun.
Yes.
I love all of it. I love the Nixon stuff. I interpret it like they're all magicians. They're all mafia. Like, I don't really pick sides. It's cool.
Oh, I think I found when I was looking, and I don't want to misspeak, but I will say I'm 98% sure Joseph Smith is related to the Rockefellers. To be continued next time on that.
Okay.
I'll bring some actual proof, because then that makes 100% sense. What Jen just said, like, yeah, it's one big circle. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I can bring some proof of how his grandson married Lawrence Washington's great granddaughter. George Washington's elder half brother.
It doesn't surprise me. Yeah, it does not surprise me with it being he supposedly arranged the whole Boston Tea Party. I didn't know that till I did a deep dive.
That's what I was thinking of when you said that. Exactly. Yeah.
I never heard that before. You would think, as patriotic as Mormons are, they'd be like, and we did that. Yes.
Right.
And no, never heard that before. Been a Mormon all my life, except for the last, decade. So weird. Gets weird. Never know.
It's super weird. Yeah.
All right. Well, now we're going to wrap it up.
You guys.
Yes. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Jen and JJ. Let me let you guys plug your stuff now at the end of the show. JJ, real quick, let everybody know where they can find your amazing work, please, sir.
JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD, not the vice president. Also, no longer a Mormon, but deeply fascinated by the topic due to the first 20 years of my life being a Mormon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Appreciate the invite, Nick and Heidi. Great talking to you again.
Awesome to talk. I can't wait till we chat again.
Hell yeah. No, thank you for both. Thank you for joining, JJ. Always appreciate it. And Jin the Ninja, what is up, my man? Let everybody know where they can find your stuff, please, sir.
All right. Well, thanks, boss. Let me say that. inviting me perpetually on the series. Of course, JJ, who is, I guess my new co-host on When I'm a Reject, and then Heidi. I'm like, everything that I've learned has been quite profound, and in a sense, I'm thinking about everything in a different way because of
Awesome.
for one statement that yes, he found his HGA. So you and I will have an awesome conversation, I think, on my show. Eventually it will happen, and hopefully, and if you say yes, and yeah, and so
bring my Crowley notes.
I'm looking forward to that.
It's interesting because I kind of just look at it like, yeah, they kind of lie a lot. So for me, I don't take it like they can do things maybe, but I don't know. I kind of think that they're, tall tales is the greatest magician's tool of all.
Well, the angels always did lie. John Dee even says that. And then even Crowley later, after he did the Book of the Law, later he was like, they lied to me, AWAS, you asshole. So with that, I'll quit cussing on your show and stop that.
Jen, you plugged everything?
Yeah, so you can find me, sorry guys, on Twitter at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn. Also my show Threshold Saints, with Spotify, Apple, and anywhere you get your podcasts. And thank you guys.
Awesome,
so much. Really fun.
Hell yeah. And your link will be in the bottom as well. And Heidi, finally, the guest, let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work, please.
Awesome. Thank you again. I had a fun time. You guys are awesome. And it's always fun to talk Mormon stuff, especially Nick loves it.
Oh, yeah. Mormons and Nazis. And so we're going to get into both.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love it. Yeah.
So good, right? Like, and I
Best
am
of both
at
worlds.
the Unfiltered Rise. Yep, everywhere podcasts are served. I do have my own website, unfilteredrise.com. If you don't want to go to anywhere else, if you go to YouTube, you'll be sadly disappointed. They do not like me and do not like my work. I talk too much about weird things, so I get dinged enough. I am mostly on any other pod chaser. So once a week on YouTube if it wasn't too spicy. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So everybody go check out their links. They're all on the bottom. Thank you all again. I really do appreciate you coming on. This is an awesome series. Again, it's a lot of stuff. I don't know a lot of it, so I'm just like sitting here like, well, what the fuck? But thank you. This is really, really interesting, and I'm really happy to have this on the Occult Rejects. And that is the end of this one. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.